Yeah. My daughter never babbled, never talked, never, and then all of a sudden one day she just talked. It was like, she was like 22 months or something. It was like, boom.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So you're all Ruthed up, right?
Yeah.
And now we're on to Esther. Excellent. Okay. So far so good?
Yep.
Okay. And you had,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in these books, and then especially as we get in Esther. So today, just as a heads up, it's going to be a little bit more of an historical kind of review as we're setting the stage. Is this chapter, right? Is this lesson is Esther becomes queen. There's a lot of context that's good to understand as we're getting into this, so we can kind of see where things are going, moving down the line as well. So with that, let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you've given us this time together today. We pray that you would guide us, that we might look back to history and see your guiding hand at work as you continue to provide and protect your people and equip us for the work that you would have us do as we point to the hope that we have that comes from you. In the name of our risen King Jesus, we pray. Amen. Okay. All right. So, Esther, where, from what you guys read through, because I looked at the study guides here, but from what you remember, when about is this happening? This intro to Esther here, these first chapter and a half or so, in terms of time, if you're setting it in context of other stuff you know about in the Bible. When about is this happening? What do you remember?
It's just like a little bit before they are allowed to go back
It's
to
actually
rebuild.
a good bit after. So let's take a look at that, right? So you have in the prophets, right, the continual call for the people to come back, to return to the Lord, like we talked about in the Lenten season, in the midweek series and everything. But the people consistently were going away from God. They were doing these other things. They were treating God like any of the deities, these like idols and the people around them. First, the northern kingdom falls, right? They're taken over by the Assyrian Empire. And as I like to say, the Assyrians, bad dudes, don't mess with the Assyrians. But God uses the Assyrian Empire as an instrument of judgment against the northern kingdom of Israel. It falls, it doesn't come back. And then roughly 100 years later or so, you have the southern kingdom of Judah also has been failing to heed the call of the prophets, including Jeremiah, right? And they are then taken into exile as well, but not by the Assyrian Empire, but by the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians are the new, they weren't bad dudes like the Assyrians, but they were still, like, they were the force to be reckoned with. So the Babylonian Empire comes in, and then you have people taken off. And there's multiple waves of deportations where the Babylonians would take some of the best and brightest, the leaders, things like that, where they would take them over to their kingdom. So in Babylon now, these people from Judah, who become known as Jews, right, from Judah, living in exile in Babylon. And you had then the people that remained were kind of like, the Babylonians were like, well, why bother taking these people? Like, kind of like the lowest classes, and just not going to bother with them. And then, even then, there's things that happen, and some of them, we're not going to get into all that, but those people are there. Okay. Then you have about 70 years of what you call the Babylonian captivity, where the people of Judah are in exile in Babylon. After about 70 years or so, we have a new player on the scene, the Persian Empire, or the like the Medes and the Persians, like this consolidated thing. The Medo-Persian Empire comes up, and then they take over, they overthrow the Babylonian Empire. So there's, and the cool thing is the scripture is pointing ahead, it's talking about even like giving the name of the guy, the emperor who's going to be in charge of things. So we hear his name as Darius or Cyrus. A couple of different names there, pointing to the same guy who has multiple names. And he comes in, and this is where we get this transition. So if you're reading through like the book of Daniel, right? You have Daniel as somebody who's God raises him up to prominence under the Babylonian Empire with like Nebuchadnezzar, but then continuing on into the Persian Empire. So in the Persian Empire, as we already hear, at this point, it's a big deal and continues to be a bigger deal. But Darius, Cyrus, he issues this proclamation that the Jews who are in exile, and it wasn't just them, but like many peoples that the Babylonians had taken, could then return back to their homelands. And what's more, they also equip the people to go back, and this we have with Nehemiah and others, where they go back and then they rebuild, so that they can rebuild their walls, they can rebuild their temple, this place where they would worship Yahweh. So that God is back in this land of Judah. So all that's happening so that you have, when these decrees are issued, many of the people do decide to go back. So they're okay, we're going to go back, and they're thinking, okay, it's going to be fantastic, we're going to go back, and it's going to be this wonderful kind of thing. They get back, and it's like ruins. And these people, like the dregs of society, right, the ones that were left, they've intermarried with other people from the surrounding nations, and so it's not the best scene when they get back. Okay, but that's not what we're talking about today. What about the people who stayed in Babylon? Because they've been there for how long? 70 years. So you've got generations of people that life in exile is all they know. And we hear that God blesses his people, and many Judeans, or now Jews, right, are prominent business people or raised to positions of prominence in the culture in Babylonian area, or now under the Median Persian Empire. So they're like, yeah, we're gonna stick around. Thanks. So bringing us up to where we enter into Esther, right? This is now about 50 years more beyond that, ballparking. So this is well over 100 years since the people were taken into exile. And now you have this that is set here in this book of Esther, kind of talking about how even though God has brought back people to the land of Judah, to this promised land, there are still people from Judah who are living all over, including many who are here in the Medo-Persian Empire. So far so good? Okay, so let's talk about some of the players here. So Ahasuerus he has another name, as these guys do. The one he's probably best known by is his Greek name, or Xerxes the Great. So that's the guy that we're going to be hearing about as we read through the book of Esther here. So Ahasuerus, he is Darius Cyrus's grandson. So we're through a few emperors here, and we'll talk more about him in a few minutes here. But the Medo-Persian Empire, you've got all these things that are happening, and this is, so now that we've kind of gone through that little bit of the historical narrative here, the first thing I want to talk about is that in all these things, who's really in charge? Who's ultimately in charge?
God.
That hasn't changed. God has ultimately been in charge, even with the Assyrian Empire coming in destroying the northern kingdom, who was in charge? God. He's using the Assyrians as a tool, right? It's judgment. God for decades and decades had been telling the people, this is the path that you're on. Turn from it. But they didn't. And so the judgment came. The Babylonian Empire, who was using them as a tool, it's God. In calling his people and rebuking it. Is even today, right? Even during times of persecution and things like that, God can be using governments, even with dictators and things, using them as a tool, even if it's a hard time, can be using it as a thing that can be for the good of his people, even if we don't see the way. But if we think about this, with when Daniel was in Babylon and later the Persian Empire for shorthand, the people there, knew peace, right? And so God's people knew peace. They had a lot of prosperity, like you said. A lot of the Jewish leaders, a lot of the people from Judah, rose to places of prominence. If God is doing that, or if God is working today, God is working today. So God's working today. But if people if they have peace, if they have prosperity, things like that, are they just supposed to sit around and just oh yeah, everything's fantastic, and just take care of themselves? No, that's a rhetorical question. No, we're called to use the peace that we have, the prosperity that we have, to serve, to care for our neighbors, to be a blessing to the world around us. It's never meant to be a selfish kind of thing. So, but God, throughout this book of Esther, as we're reading through it, we see that God ultimately is using the government, so Ahasuerus or Xerxes, and it's going to be something which is ultimately going to be for the benefit of his people. So that's kind of first point that I wanted to hit there. So as Christians then, what should our attitude be towards the government? There's obviously a lot of people kind of had different thoughts on this especially over the past decade plus. Should we have a theocratic government? And this is the thing. It's it's based off your religion that determines how things. What's an example of a theocratic government?
England?
It may be on paper, right? What's that?
Iran.
Yeah. So, for example, any state that's under Islam is an Islamic state. That's the religion, in theory, is running the government, right? So, is America a theocratic government? No. And should it be? Well, no. That's the thing, is we're not. It's never the only good theocratic governments back when God was before you had the kings in Israel. Is right. Is God was the king. And that's we had the judges. And if you've been following us through the stories, we've been reading through that right over this year. There's been a lot of stuff we've already talked about that. But so we as Christians, though, as citizens, and look at our context, right? Because we're here in America. Do we actively seek to overthrow the government? Well, no. The government God has set the government, whether it's here or whether it's in Iran, whether it's wherever. It's ultimately supposed to be for the good of the people, protecting people. But ultimately, right, is to point to who God is the one who sustains and cares for. So some governments obviously do a better job of that than others. Though mostly it's up to the people, because it's not the government's job to be the church. Does that make sense? It's the government's job, in terms of the sense of how God uses government to protect the church, or not get in the church's way. So that doesn't always happen, and people have different thoughts as to how that should be. So Christians, right? If you have an office within the government, yeah, you still live out your faith as a Christian. You don't do things in your government office that are actually going to hinder the work of the church. That's against your identity. And sometimes you Christians who are in office you are in these positions where they need to be bound by their conscience and faith, that think, well, no, this factors into the decisions that I make. It's not that you are making decisions for other people. It's like, well, you should be a Christian, so you need, like, no, that's part of the tension that people have to have in these public offices. But we live in a time and place where the right to religious freedom is a core tenet of our country's rules and regulations, right? And that kind of cuts both ways, because how much of our nation today needs to know who Jesus is and who he is to them and how that shapes their lives, right? So that while we have this freedom as the church here in our nation, we also we have a great opportunity ahead of us. Does it make sense so far? Yeah, okay. All right, so that's kind of the general stuff. Let's get into a little bit more with the context for Esther and Xerxes or Ahasuerus. So who is this guy? Well, he famously tries to conquer Greece. It has a number of efforts on that front. It does not work out for him. So just in case you're wondering why we have Greek and not Persian and things, like, yeah, it did. Ahasuerus, Xerxes, he didn't win. He doesn't do what he needs to do to get that done. So to give you a sense of like how the guy worked, right? He had a bridge on his we're heading to Greece. We need to build a bridge from Asia to Europe, right? To get troops across, things like that. So he has this bridge built. Before it's even able to be used, though, a storm just destroys it. So what does Ahasuerus do? Well, he orders his troops to punish the sea by whipping it. Tell you what, see. He also has the bridge builders or the designers and stuff like that decapitated. So I don't know, design issue or whatever. Okay. So you had that. Somebody had pleaded to him to release one of his like 5 sons from military service. In response, he gets enraged. He has the son cut in half, and then has his armies march through the 2 halves of the body on their way out to war. So this is this guy. When he's back home after being defeated by the Greeks, he kind of gets infatuated with his brother's wife, but rather than committing adultery with his brother's wife, he rather takes their daughter, who's married to his son, and this whole mess of things. And his brother, by the end of it, his brother's dead. His sister-in-law that he had lusted after, she's dead too. So anyway, so yeah, not the best guy, not a role model here. Okay, so we had that. But let's take a look at what we have here in the opening chapters of Esther. Well, he has these banquets, right? And this first banquet that he has that goes for this very big time with his officials, his servants, in the 3rd year of his reign, right? Goes for 180 days. It's a great thing. So he's doing this, and this is entirely possible that over the course of like this celebration, this is where he gets the idea. I'm going to go take over Greece. I'm going to go conquer Greece, as he's meeting with all these folks. So planning this invasion here. But then after that, though, he then has a banquet, a week-long banquet for the people of his capital. So that it's not that he's like excessively lavish. It was big in the Persian Empire to have banquets. And you see as we go through the book of Esther, significant stuff happens at banquets. So keep that in mind, right, as we're going through. But it's showing that there is generosity that's here, that this beneficence is being shown to the people, but also, okay, Ahasuerus, he's the man, he's the dude. Like, see, he's the big guy here. Now, part of the generosity, right, is we see, where is it in the first chapter there, drinks are given, and there's the drinking according to this edict. There is no compulsion for the king to give orders to the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. So, a couple things with that. So one, the no compulsion thing is part of it. If you're at the royal banquet, you just get to drink as much as you want. No, you can only drink when the king drinks. So if you're only drinking as much as the king drinks, you're limited. But with this edict, there is no compulsion. Anybody can do as much as they drink. It's like, no, it's open bar. So there's that. Now, it is entirely possible, and we hear in other historical records too, that the Persians definitely got their drink on here, but that there's probably some over imbibing, over serving that's happening. So all of this is happening, and so when we get to this point of the feast where the king, so Queen Vashti is having a feast at the palace as well, but then on the seventh day of this kind of bonus feast, it says that, where is it, verse 10, right? The heart of the king was merry with wine, so he's drunk. And we hear that other places in scripture, this merry with wine kind of thing. It's not just buzzed, it's like, okay. So he calls to have his eunuchs bring Queen Vashti down, and she refuses. And maybe she's like, oh no, he's drunk. I'm not getting involved with this. So the king's eunuch comes to her, issues this, she refuses, and then that kind of sets the stage for everything else that happens. So the king is angry. Now, the king, so think about this, even though with the drinking and everything like that, does he act out of his anger?
He didn't kill her.
No, well, he doesn't. What does he do? He then meets with his counselors and kind of like to figure out, okay, well, what's the plan here for what we should do with all these things? They said, well, command that she no longer gets to come into your presence. So even out of everything we know about Ahasuerus, Xerxes, right? He has some restraint, so that he's not just impulsively acting in an angry way. So he's going through this process, and then he doesn't act on his anger, but waits. Okay, so they have this thing. There's this proclamation that goes out throughout the kingdom. So that's where we're at with Vashti. So that she is out. She's on the outs. We then get to this next stage of things as we kind of set the stage for Esther. So that the king, so that was maybe before the attempted invasion of Greece. Now we come to a point some years later, after Xerxes, Ahasuerus has been focused on external affairs and everything, all these things going on with Greece. Well, that didn't work out. He's back home now. His attention now is like, oh yeah, I don't have a queen. I should do something about that. Because his attention has been otherwise preoccupied. Fine. So he comes back now and it's like, okay, well, we need to rectify this not having a queen thing. So we have a little bit of information and context about, okay, we're going to go out and have this mass talent search for who's what's a good thing here is like I don't even remember the names of the reality shows anymore. But like
The Bachelorette.
the next great, well, the Bachelorette kind of thing, yeah, like the mega version of the Bachelorette or the Bachelor, right? Is or America's Next Top Talent, is whatever. So next Persia's next great queen. So they have this thing that goes out to everyone. Now we have this introduction here in chapter 2 of this guy Mordecai. So we hear about Mordecai that he is somebody who came. He's a descendant of the people who were originally taken to exile. Because remember, the exile was over 100 years beforehand. He's a descendant of the people of Judah, so he's a Jew, and it's entirely possible he's related to King Saul, and that line, that household, because Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Some of these names like Kish and other ones, Jair, coming from the line of Saul. So he was there. He's living there. He's raising his cousin because her parents died. So his uncle is the girl's father. We don't hear how the parents died, but her name is Hadassah or Myrtle. But in Persian, it's Esther, relating to Ishtar or Star. So that he's raising his cousin Star as his own daughter. So maybe he's a little bit older than she is, but so she lives with her uncle there, and she's this beautiful woman in form and appearance. Excuse me. Thank you. And so now the king's order is issued. This edict is proclaimed that this talent search is not optional. Right, so they go around, they search out these women throughout the empire, find Esther, and she comes in. She's brought in, so she's basically taken in under custody, and then put under the charge of Haggai, who's king's eunuch here. But we hear that Esther finds favor with Haggai, and maybe because she is not like high maintenance compared to many of the other women that are there. So so there's this year-long thing. Once they come in under the king's household as part of the harem, there's this year-long process for beautification and everything as they're being made ready to be presented to the king. So all this happens. So over the course of the year, Esther's there, and then they're looking ahead, and then the time comes for the young women to be brought forward to the king, and for him to interview them, which basically means what? He sleeps with them,
Right. Yeah.
right? But they also, each of them is kind of like, if you think about it, is like a weird version of like a Miss Universe pageant or something like that, the beauty segment or whatever, the talent segment, whatever. Esther, when it's her time to go before the king, what does she do? She asks the king's eunuch, like she doesn't like make a big presentation. She just asks the king's eunuch, who would probably know him best and know the best, like what you can do to impress him. Like, okay, well, tell me what to do. And he likes her, the king's eunuch, is like she's kind of a favorite, so he sets her up for success. And then between her beauty and the way that she maybe comes before the king, it's like Ahasuerus is like, all right, we got our winner. We got our next queen here. So God has worked through all of this though, so that now Esther is in this place of prominence before the king. And so we'll talk more about that in the weeks ahead. Did you notice that? Because one of the questions I saw in the guide as you're going through the week, how often is God mentioned? Zero. Not at all, right? So we'll talk more about that in the future lessons here. But even though God is not mentioned by name, does that mean that he's not in charge?
No.
He's not. No, obviously maybe not obviously, but No, that's, God is at work, God's in charge, and nothing has changed that. So we'll see how all this kind of goes together. Now, God did not raise up every girl from Judah or descendant from Judah, every Jew, to put them into this place of promise, to give them this great chance for success. This is with Esther. Does that mean that God isn't caring for his people? No, we're going to see how God works through this specific way to care for a much wider audience. That reminds me of somebody. Yeah. So things to consider. So that's that for today. Any questions or other things? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I'll go get that.